Gonna make sure we're broadcasting, which it looks like
Are we good on these guys?
Yep.
Do I press it here? I think we are live on Instagram, Facebook, 2 Facebook pages.
We are.
Yeah.
So hey, you guys, thank you for joining us. It's Wednesday at 12, and it means it's Calls with Paul, and it's episode 32. We're just getting older every week. Yeah. And I don't know, since this whole thing with coronavirus started, I feel like I've aged 20 years.
Yeah, we have to be careful because if we do this every week for a long period of time, it will be really, really old.
Well, today we're joined with a dear friend of ours, Adam Orman, who is one of the owners of Locadoro, which is a very regarded restaurant in Austin, and not just for their wonderful food, but for Adam's advocacy for restaurant workers and the food industry as a whole. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. And I have a lot of free time right now.
Unfortunately, right?
Well, tell us a little bit about how you're doing personally and what you're up to, the configuration of your household these days and what's been happening.
So right now, I am staying out of the restaurant as much as possible. I go in about once or twice a week to get mail, upload invoices, because obviously our bookkeeper is no longer is working remotely. There's usually a couple hours worth of stuff to do a week, but mostly I'm able to stay connected to people at home. I've got 2 kids, an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. No, she's gonna be mad at me. An 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. We're trying to figure out schooling. The school district just started posting stuff this week, so that changed our schedule a little bit. Getting them outside when it's not 95 degrees, and that's sort of muddling along. But they're pretty patient. I feel like they understand what's going on to some extent, and what the issues with me in the restaurant means. They spent a lot of time there the last 4 years, and they know all of our employees, and they were very aware the day that I had to go in and tell everyone that we were laying them off, and that we were going to take out. And then the day that we had to go in again and tell, the day that I had to write to everybody at that point, because people weren't coming in anymore, and tell everybody that we were just going to be closing temporarily. So a lot of my job right now is coordinating between the Texas Workforce Commission and our employees. This was everyone's first week to file, and it has not gone smoothly, as you can imagine. I'm sorry. The information is not updating. The website and the phone line are obviously really hard to get in touch, are really hard to get onto. They got something like 1.7 million registrations in one day last week. And I was reading from a good a customer and economist and good friend who lives here, who does a lot of work with the city, that the unemployment rate is likely to be somewhere between 25 and 32% in Austin, and that the service industry is going to make up somewhere around that food service could make up somewhere around 70% of that. So that's part of it. Part of my job is also applying for loans, applying for the through the Paycheck Protection Program and the Disaster Relief Fund, and those have changed already in the 3 days that they've been available. So I've filled out applications and then been told that there was already a new application that I needed to fill out, and there's also no timeline on them. So when I tell my employees that what I'm hearing from the Workforce Commission, it's more or less the same as me hearing from my bank that, yeah, the application's in, but we can't tell you how much you can be getting or when. So, and then from there, you trickle that down to talking to vendors who are talking to our landlord, and and luckily our landlord has been very understanding and knows that we've applied and knows that we're going to get back to them when we hear, and has waived late fees for as long as necessary. And we're all just hoping that the first bailout does some of the job. And I think everybody's working now to make sure that the next bailout, and there will be a next bailout already, is going to is going to work a little bit differently with small business. So that's sort of the third part of things that I'm working on, is trying to work with places like the Independent Restaurant Coalition and Hospitality United Alliances and the City Council and state reps to get the voices of small businesses, specifically independent restaurants, in front of the people who are pulling the purse strings. It's not exactly selling wine, but it keeps me busy.
Well, I know that at least in our neighborhood, in the neighborhood association, there's been a lot of people very concerned about the service industry and trying to buy gift cards and do takeout and do those kinds of things. And I know those are tiny little drops in the bucket. It's been 3 weeks since everything sort of came to a halt, with the restaurants being able to serve people in person.
Yeah.
Did y'all get any heads up that
Not specifically, but everybody knew. I would say everybody knew about 24 hours ahead of time that the takeout order was going to go into effect. I'd been in really close contact with friends from the Bay Area and New York and Seattle who were going through that, and they were a couple days ahead of us. And then again, with the shelter-in-place order, what we didn't know with the shelter-in-place was whether or not takeout was still going to be okay. But they've pretty much used the same language that other cities have used, so we're pretty sure takeout was still going to be okay. And we had already closed takeout just before the shelter-in-place, and we had already gone to a takeout only the day before dining rooms were closed. So there was the order, and then there was knowing anything else. So even if you knew that the order was going to go into place, that didn't necessarily mean that you knew, what was going to happen, after that.
And so y'all did takeout for a while, but you decided to stop, right?
Yes, we did takeout for 10 days, and it was going well financially speaking. We were. It was we had gotten to a point where we had an online ordering portal, so it was much smoother, very quickly. But it also was this kind of catch-22 where we felt like, there were a couple of catch-22s. The more business we were doing, the harder it was to keep the place clean, because it meant that we needed more employees to execute, and it meant that there were more customers. And even if we were trying to keep people outside, not everybody was following that. And I mean, 3 weeks ago, even the way people were physically distancing was very different than the way they are now. I don't think people were as shy about coming in and asking to use the bathroom. People weren't like, people who hadn't placed an order online would come in and say, can I just order and pay here? And we weren't really saying no yet. I don't think that would happen now, but yeah, it just meant that there were a lot of people coming into the space. And with our employees, with the way that we were hearing about what asymptomatic carriers can can do and how long it can be in your system, it just didn't seem worth it to take that risk with our employees and our customers, that somebody could be working sick and not know it.
That was the right move, Adam. I imagine that was really hard and kind of selfless of you to step back, you know?
At that point, I mean, I think by the time I just waffled about 5 times even before answering. Yeah, I think it's still hard. I think it still feels like I know some of my friends who have figured out ways to do it more safely, in different kinds of restaurants, or people who are doing groceries and who are doing groceries in their spaces. So they're not preparing food anymore, but they're just they've basically set up farmers markets in their spaces, and they can have like one customer at a time, and that feels really selfless to me, because they're not making any money on that. They're just doing it so that the farms still have a place to sell their products, so that customers can go and not have to risk going to HEB. You know, if you know that you're the only person who's allowed in the restaurant to do your shopping, that's a much safer kind of interaction. But the fear for that I've talked about with my partner is how much are we going to do to set something up and find out in 4 days that we can't do it anymore, right. Or that some of the things around it have changed, that some of the restrictions about how you're allowed to continue in business have changed. And that part, that part's so hard, that anxiety.
You know, we've had local restaurants that posted like you and closed and said they didn't think it was safe to serve people, and that, you know, I really think those are hard messages to communicate to the public, and it really does. You know, for those restaurants like you and others that have done that, I think as a community, we need to remember that when things do come back, that those are the businesses that made the hard calls and really weren't getting any income in the meantime, to kind of keep it going. You mentioned go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, there's going to be a lot of people to remember, and it's going to be hard to try and spend money at all the places that need it. And it definitely had more to do with closing, because we wanted as many people. What we were hearing from the doctor who runs the direct primary care clinic that our business uses was that, you know, as long as there weren't tests, there was no way to guarantee that that to stop the spread without everybody staying home. And determining that you're not essential is, maybe that's the part that's selfless, especially with people with big egos. Deciding that you're not essential was a hard part, and something that I wish we saw a little bit more of. But I don't expect small business owners to make that decision. I mean, I think that's a really important part. We're not at all judgmental about any of the decisions that any of the small business owners are making, when there's so little guidance from officials, or inconsistencies between what different officials are recommending. It makes it really hard. It makes it really hard to know what choice to make.
I think no matter what decision a restaurateur makes, I think it's hard, like on both sides of that ball. So yeah. Our hearts and thoughts are out to you guys. Now, I have a selfless question. When do I get to go back and eat at a restaurant? What's that going to look like?
Man.
I need to quit cooking, please. When do we get to go out to eat?
Yeah, that's a really hard. One thing we've done, I mean, I know that a lot of places like Farmhouse Delivery and Farm to Table, and now I know even HEB are starting to have local restaurant prepared meals available. So I know we're doing that through Farm to Table and Farmhouse Delivery. We're selling some baked pastas. And I know that a bunch of restaurants are going to be doing that through HEB, and all the sales are going to go to the restaurant. HEB is not taking any cut from whatever it is that they do. That's what I've heard anyway, which is something. At least you get to eat restaurant food at home. As far as the going out part, that's so hard. I mean, I would like to think that we would be open in some capacity sometime in May. Yeah. In like a really reduced way where we can separate tables and put as much business outside as possible. I've read the predictions that have it really at more like July and August, which is not a great time to be open in Texas. But then again, I mean, we know the one thing we do know is that it'll be really hot. Usually that's when everybody's out of town also, but that's probably going to be very different this summer. So I think you're still looking at probably a couple of months.
You've been plugged in. For those of you that are just joining us and people are still coming on the call. So Adam Orman is one of the owners of Locadora, one of our beloved Austin restaurants, and a very big advocate for fair wages and restaurant workers. How do you see, you are plugged in, Adam, nationwide with your friends and colleagues, kind of like we are on the real estate side, but on the restaurant side. What kind of hit do you think we're going to see? How many of the restaurants that we love are just not going to reopen? And, and how many people that were working in those industries are going to be finding other jobs and not come back to the workforce? Like, what's it look like, do you think? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but like, what are you seeing and hearing?
I have read, I think we were just talking about this before the call, that Austin, I've read predictions from city economists that the unemployment rate in Austin could be somewhere between 25 and 30% this year, and that I believe it was somewhere around 70% of that is going to be in food service. So that's a lot. I've read that and heard in New York that they're looking at, as many as 5,000 restaurants not making it through, which would be, a contraction of 25 to 30% of the restaurant industry in New York. There's part of this where you can look and see what was happening in the industries in towns where property values were increasing, and that there were certain kinds of restaurant groups and certain venture-backed groups that were starting to push other restaurants to the periphery, and has this just sped that up in a really significant way? Maybe. I think everybody's certainly going to be hurt by this, but the people who aren't capitalized are going to be hurt more. The people who don't have access to the bailout money are going to be hurt more. And then there's the huge trickle down. How much are the farms hurt? How much is once we do open up, how many customers can't afford to go out to eat anymore? So it's tricky. We're in a relatively good location because we're in a neighborhood, and we're in a relatively affluent neighborhood. So we know that we'll have a base of support, but that's not enough. That's certainly, we still rely on tourism a lot. We rely on people coming from all over Central Texas, and I just can't imagine that people are going to get into the pattern of traveling to eat very quickly. Driving cross town from Steiner Ranch or Lakeway, to come all the way over to Mueller is not something that's going to be happening. It's not something that people are going to just all of a sudden be able to feel comfortable with, I don't think.
So what can people that have the ability and the resources to do it, what can we do to support our local restaurants and businesses like yours?
There are a couple of national funds, and then Texas-based funds. The Southern Smoke Foundation is linked with one. The One Fair Wage Emergency Fund is one that we've worked with because we're a member of their national organization, and they work really hard as a workers' organization all the time to advocate for higher minimum wages and for paid sick leave. So that's a great national fund to get money to service industry employees. As far as individual restaurants, I think people have heard a lot about buying gift cards. We try as much as possible. We've been selling house accounts, so much larger gift cards, and then putting a huge premium on top of it. So if you spend for the amount that you spend, you get an additional 20% on top of that. So that's a thing that I've told people. It's great if you do that with us, but if we're not your favorite restaurant, please call your favorite restaurant and say, I would like to buy $1,000 gift card. Will you give us, would you give us $200 on top of that to incentivize us to incentivize it? And I don't think there's a restaurant in the world right now that's going to say no. So I know that that's not something that just anybody can do, but it's definitely.
Well, for other small local businesses like us, we're always looking for ways to give clients gifts and to give them tokens of recognition, and being able to think about maybe shifting what our typical gift would be to a local restaurant gift certificate. Yeah. And honey, if we can buy them in bulk, I'm there.
Yeah, like
yeah,
I just got
right.
In a lasagna, I got extra lasagna.
Right. Or
no, that's a great idea though, because you could do you're not necessarily buying that account for yourself, but if you tell a restaurant like I want to give out $100 gift cards to clients, will you give me 2 free? That's not a bad ask. I mean, I think that's a really kind and generous thing to do. And when normally we think that asking for free stuff is not. In that case, in this case, I think it's okay.
Do you think we could get the liquor stores to do that too, Adam? Because
the liquor stores don't need any help right now. The liquor stores are doing really well, which is encouraging because I know it means that a lot of my friends who are on the wine side of the industry are able to find work. Are able to find jobs in their companies to just helping out with retail, because retail's been the retail spirits industry, retail wine is doing quite well.
And it's so funny because it's so uneven, right? I mean, we've also talked to other local businesses. One of our friends is Austin Yard Cards, and our daughter had her 6th birthday this week, and we had to figure out how do we virtually acknowledge and celebrate her birthday. And we did a little Austin Yard Cards thing, and they mentioned that their business is going, strong because people are having to get creative in how they do things. And then you have other industries where businesses come to a screeching halt, and it is so uneven, to hear restaurants are struggling, yet the wine and spirits industry is, going gangbusters. It's very uneven.
And that's what, and we're lucky that H-E-B is our local chain, because I think they always have, they do a lot of, they do
such
a lot.
Beautiful thing.
And knowing that there's a way that they can just support, knowing that there's a way that they can sell restaurant things and just support restaurants, and that they don't have to worry quite as much about their bottom line right now, is encouraging. I hope that as this goes on, more of the people who are on the positive side of the ledger will start to figure out the things that they can do, for those of us who are still trying to find our way.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, been in some ways interesting as a local business owner to see businesses that we love, like Still Austin Whiskey. All of a sudden, they're cranking out hand sanitizer,
Right.
small quantities. To see the local Monogram shop is now sewing masks. To figure out how you pivot your local business in these times. It's my new word, pivot. How you pivot in these times to still provide help and value to the people that need it and make your business viable. We're struggling with how to do that with real estate. And so one of the ways we're doing that is trying to connect with people like you and get info and have people answer questions that people have.
We just want to be of value in some way, to the community that served us so well over all the years. And
Yeah.
restaurants are a huge part of Austin, and bars, and all that stuff. That's the scene. And thank you for your leadership on your side of the ledger there.
You mentioned the fair wage. I think not everyone may be familiar with the advocacy that you've been leading with the fair wage. Can you tell us a little bit about what the issue is, and what that looks like, what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. So the sub minimum wage, or the tipped minimum wage nationally, is still $2.13 an hour. So
that was college, Adam. My goodness.
well, it hasn't changed. That means you're relatively young, because it changed. It went up to $2.13 in 1991. And that was under Bush 1. So we've gone through Democratic and Republican administrations, and the minimum wage has budged from 5 to 7.25 over that time, and the sub minimum has not. There are several states around the country that have raised it, and that don't have a sub minimum wage at all, where the tipped minimum wage is pegged to their state minimum wage. And in some states, the state minimum wage is significantly higher than 7.25 as well, which creates its own set of issues. But basically, the short history of this, which I think is really important, because it lets people know. I think it's really important. This came from the tip minimum wage came during Reconstruction, and it was a way to not pay slaves in new jobs. A lot of like Pullman porters and servants and house workers were allowed to be paid nothing, and they were only paid tips. There was a strike in the 1920s, and so the tip minimum wage was raised and was created for the first time, and it was less than $1. So from the Pullman porter strike in the 1920 in the teens to 1991, it went from spare change up to $2.13, and that's where it lives now. And as I said, has not changed in 30 years. So knowing that it's a legacy of slavery, I think helps change people's minds about how they feel about the idea of tips. Because a lot of folks, when they're talking about a restaurant like Locadoro, know that even if my servers were making $2.13 an hour, the food costs enough and the people are generous enough that they're going to be making more than $7 an hour. That is not the case at 2:00 in the morning at the Denny's in Fort Stockton. That person is not necessarily making $7.25 an hour, and the burden is on them to prove that to their boss and then get paid up to $7.25 an hour, because you are still guaranteed that, but it's up to you to chase that money down. So there are hundreds of thousands of dollars of wage fraud claims in Travis County alone every year. And if we raised that to at the very least $7.25 an hour, if we eliminated the tip minimum wage and knew that people were not dependent on tips, and were that little bit more financially secure, honestly, I think that this crisis looks a lot different. I think that you have a lot of service industry workers who were on much firmer financial foundation before this started. I think that when they go to the Workforce Commission and have to apply for unemployment benefits, they have a much cleaner record of how much they were making because they've been making a real wage, and they don't have to, and not having their tip, and they're not, because tips get declared in lots of different, sometimes questionable ways. There are lots of other issues surrounding sexual harassment and the tip minimum wage as well. If your wages are completely dependent on tips, you are subject to all manner of harassment from customers, from coworkers, and from managers, because you need that good section in order to make tips that night. You need the good schedule. You need to work Saturday nights, and if your manager is the one making the schedule, you have to do what manager says. You need your food from the kitchen, so you got to do what the cooks say. And there's a lot of really ugly stories about what folks have to put up with in order to make their tips. And no one else does this. There's no other industry that is built like this. How to change it is somewhat more complicated. There's not a one size fits all if we move to that direction. But what we want to do, and what we're setting ourselves up to do with a bunch of other restaurants in Austin, is be able to be a resource to other restaurants that want to make this transition, so that we can figure out what model works best for them, how to message it to their employees, how to message it to their customers, and get them to a place where they're creating a more equitable environment.
You know, I'd be all right if I went out to eat and I paid 20% more, and in exchange there's, like that'd be fine with me.
Yeah, and there have been surveys that show that people would be willing to pay a certain percent more to know that their servers were making a living wage. Yeah, that data exists.
These are like our friends when we go out to eat, right? Like part of the scene is having a nice waiter, and like the idea that these guys are being abused in a fiscal way is sad.
Yes. Yeah, and it's, and there's a lot of evidence that it works. There's a lot of evidence that the states that have one fair wage, the servers are on a government, there's servers are on government assistance less. There are less examples of sexual harassment, and people still tip. That there are still higher rates of tipping in one fair wage states than not. And I feel like the best evidence that this works is to look at chains in California. There are Applebee's in California, and there are Applebee's in Texas. In California, they pay all of their employees, I think it's $12.50 an hour now. In Texas, they pay their employees $2.13 an hour. They haven't moved out of California. They've figured out ways. If there was really no way to make money doing that, they would have closed. They're smart business people, but they haven't. They know that it works, and they are their own proof that it works. I'm not picking on Applebee's, but
yeah.
Well, I will, because that's where I worked. That's where I worked when I was in college as a freshman, was at Applebee's. And I didn't know I needed to advocate to my employer to make sure that my tips equal minimum wage. Like, where is the education to that workforce as to what their rights are? Yeah, it's very eye-opening, Adam. Thank you for helping kind of, you've been doing this tirelessly, I know, for years, and thank you for continuing to advocate on it, and also for educating us so we know a little bit more too.
Yeah, I had no idea. And I imagine most people don't.
No. I mean, the education piece is a big part of it, and it's not fun. No, it's not what we want to talk about it's not what we want to talk about at the restaurant with customers.
No, of course not.
No. Well, our 9-year-old has come into the room, which tells me our timer is probably Probably, yep.
Oh my gosh.
Screening
Okay.
everything, and I reviewed it all.
Okay.
Can I read now?
Yes. You can.
Read now. Isn't that great?
There are worse
Nice.
problems when he's like, I get off my iPad and actually read a book. Yes.
Yeah,
Adam, thank you.
I could hear my kids listening to this in the other room, but I'm not sure how much longer they were going to be able to pay attention to Daddy. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank
really
you.
good.
And again, everybody that's listening, this is Adam Orman, one of the owners of Locadora. We hope you guys will find a way to support them as well as other Austin restaurants as we all sort of make our way through these uncertain times. And if you've got any questions or comments, drop them below and we will forward them on to Adam and help get you answers. Thank you. Adam, tell the family we said hi.
Thank you
I will
so
do
much.
that. Take care, guys.